I was disappointed.
The war against Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, sent oil prices surging, and destabilized the entire energy architecture of the Middle East. But the ripple effects extend far beyond the battlefield, including into Central Asia, where energy exports, trade routes, and geopolitical alignments are all now in play. This is the Turan Research Center, hosted by the Yorktown Institute. I'm Bruce Pannier. I've spent 4 decades covering the region. Like, subscribe, and leave your opinion in the comments. Your opinion really matters to us. Now, let's get into it. Joining me today, Director of the Turan Research Institute, Joseph Epstein, and Carnegie Endowment Fellow, Timur Umarov. Thank you both for being here. Timur, let's start with the most immediate problem. Oil is up 35% in a week. Kazakhstan is the world's 12th largest oil producer. But the CPC pipeline to the Black Sea is already crippled by Ukrainian drone strikes. Is there a scenario where sky-high oil prices actually hurt Central Asian producers rather than help them?
For now, I would say that the short-term outcome for Kazakhstan will be a good one, considering that the oil prices went up. Kazakhstan can now fill in the budget holes that were left because of the drone attacks over the last several years, and there were different reportings, for example, from Bloomberg, saying that there were around 20 events in the last 4 years of the war in Ukraine where Kazakhstan had problems with its oil exports to European markets, which left a lot of holes in the budget of Kazakhstan. And considering that for Kazakhstan, oil exports account for almost 40% of its state budget, it is a lot of money that we're talking about. So the short-term high of the oil prices is a good consequence for Kazakhstan, but long-term, it's not sustainable. This is going to be a problem not only for Kazakhstan's planning, but also for the sustainability of its budget and control of the oil export in the future. So I wouldn't be, overly optimistic about it. And more than that, if we take away the short-term optimistic scenario for Kazakhstan, the war in Iran brings a lot of instability geopolitically. It brings disruptions from logistical point of view, and all of those consequences in common make the situation very much uncomfortable for Kazakhstan in particular and other Central Asian states. And all in all, I don't believe that we should be, optimistic about the events for Central Asian states.
Okay. Joseph, Iran has effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, not with its navy, which the U.S. has destroyed, but with cheap drones. 20% of global oil supply is offline. Central Asia's trade doesn't transit Hormuz directly, but the price shock hits everything. How long can Iran sustain this? And does this change how Central Asian governments think about the security of their own choke points, like the CPC terminal?
So Iran's southern coastline is mountainous and it's full of hidden IRGC launch positions. So that is something that is very difficult to sanitize from the air quickly. However, that being said, I don't think that this lasts as long as people fear. Hormuz isn't just a Western choke point. China moves a significant amount of its oil through it. Beijing has enormous leverage over Tehran and likely does not have too much tolerance for a prolonged closure. So I would expect pretty intense Chinese pressure to reopen the lane, and possibly even before the war ends, depending on how long it lasts. For Central Asia, and I think for the world in general, the lesson is pretty clear. Kazakhstan just watched cheap drones close one of the world's most important choke points. Its own CPC terminal has also been hit by the same very similar tech. And so now any export strategy that depends on a single choke point, I mean, the whole world knows can be defeated by a $20,000 drone.
Okay, Timur, Central Asia has spent years building alternatives to Russian transit routes. The southern corridor through Iran was a key piece. Now Russia's route is under drone attack, Iran's at war, and the Gulf is closed. How much of Central Asia's trade actually depends on Iran, and what's left when every diversification route fails all at once?
I think this is a very unlikely scenario where all of the routes that Central Asia has been building throughout the decades will collapse at the same time, and Central Asia will be left with nothing and no connections to the world. So, and at the same time, we should consider that although southern route has been very much in the news over the last 4 years for sure, but even before that, and specifically for some countries of Central Asia, that was a potentially much more interesting route to develop. We should still keep in mind that the majority of the connections that Central Asia has with the world, with the global trade, is through the north. And increasingly so through China and the Middle Corridor, and not so much through Iran. Iran was never the main trade route that was considered by Central Asian states. It was always there's a additional bonus that would be glad to have, but no one depended on it too much. And all of the talks about building additional infrastructures through Iran didn't went too far from negotiation table. So considering that, I don't have a clear data of how much trade of Central Asian countries depended on the routes through Iran, but my take would be that it's not more than 5% of internal of external connection of Central Asian countries to other parts of the world, considering that Russia would be accountable for around 70-80% of the trade that Central Asia had, depending on what country we're talking about and what kind of products we're considering. And the role of the Middle Corridor has been increasing. So the portion of Iran was minuscule compared to those other routes. But it, of course, damages the options that Central Asian countries have, and being a landlocked countries and double landlocked in Uzbekistan's case, it's never a comfortable position. And strategically speaking, Central Asian countries should be thinking about those scenarios and should be considering those for their future, because as we see the geopolitical atmosphere in which Central Asia exists becoming more and more unpredictable, and those events that we're observing today in Iran might be also replicated in other parts of the world that Central Asia depend upon. So that should be part of the strategic planning of Central Asian leaderships, and I do believe that there are people thinking about that.
Joseph, the Supreme Leader's dead. The IRGC's 31 provincial commands are operating autonomously. Iran is still launching drone and missile waves, and it's already struck targets in Azerbaijan and across the Gulf. What is Iran's war strategy right now? And should Caspian states, particularly Azerbaijan, be worried about spillover into their waters?
So Iran's strategy right now consists of a couple parts. The first and ultimate goal is to survive. The second is to increase political pressure on President Trump as much as possible. And they can do that by raising the price of oil. trying to create as many US casualties as possible, which so far they haven't done that good of a job in, and striking the region indiscriminately. And on that point, actually, an interesting thing to note is that Iran has struck the UAE much more in this round of fighting than it has actually attacked Israel. Tehran realized that it could do more damage given the UAE's close proximity, while punishing Abu Dhabi for aligning the most, I would say, in the region with Israel and the United States. Another key point is striking the region causes the US and its allies to use up interceptors, which are very expensive. So it's a type of economic warfare. In terms of survival, the key has been redundancy. They have what's called the Mosaic Doctrine, which promotes decentralization. So Iran, as you mentioned, has over 30 provincial IRGC commands, and each has an integrated intelligence, besieged militia, and security forces. And that has the whole point of that system is to survive decapitation. The supreme leader was killed on February 28th. And his son, who is the new supreme leader, it isn't quite clear if he's incapacitated or not. All the same, more than 30 waves of attacks have been launched. Even as Israel and the US destroy a lot of the launchers. So in short, I would say the machine runs even without the head. In terms of ending the war, while he has promised multiple times a quick operation, President Trump's rhetoric has also been pretty tough. He's vowed that the war will, quote, continue until the enemy is totally and decisively defeated. He has promised, I forget how he said it, but I think it was something like fire, fury, and death. And overall, the messaging is kind of mixed, but it's pretty classic Trump in the sense that he's keeping all options open, especially under considerable pressure, given the Iranian strategy. Remember that he did call for unconditional surrender during the 12-day war, but then ended it before that. However, this time, I don't think he will do that. I think that he learned a lot of the lessons from the 12-day war. But all the same, we'll see. As to the Caspian states, I think Azerbaijan has the most to fear. Iran already struck Azerbaijan, as you mentioned, and allegedly planned an attack on the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. The IRGC did anyway. Tehran has long threatened Azerbaijan, especially its energy and transport infrastructure. I wrote last November about Azerbaijan's post-Karabakh military buildup, which is actually quite interesting considering that since they returned Karabakh in 2023, they've actually increased military expenditures, and if you look at what they've been purchasing, it makes sense because they've been buying systems that help with ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They've been purchasing coastal radars, drones, a lot of it from Israel, by the way. And considering that the Armenia contingency has long been resolved, it clearly points at a strategy of trying to maintain some sort of littoral defense. And that points to Iran.
Okay. Timur, China imports 40% of its oil through Hormuz. It's been buying Iranian crude at steep discounts for years. That arrangement is now at risk. Does this crisis push China into a major infrastructure build in Central Asia, new pipelines, expanded capacity, and is trading Russian dependency for Chinese dependency actually an improvement?
I'm not sure that China will try to replace all of the energy shortages that it doesn't have access to from the Middle East now with Central Asian states. I do believe that the first thing China would be doing is turning into Russia, considering that Russia has a surplus of energy resources that it wants to put on the market, but it's struggling to find buyers because of the sanctions pressure from the West since 2022, and later with the oil cap and other consequences of Russia's full-scale invasion. So for the time being, I would anticipate that China will turn to Russia, and Russia will be happily providing all of the necessary energy resources to the Chinese economy, while we will not see, a speedy comeback to talks about the Line D from Turkmenistan to China, I don't consider that the current unpredictable situation in Iran will push China to make decisions that will definitely have effect on strategic sustainability of its economic dependencies on different routes. So let's not, jump into conclusions. We're just been around, 2 weeks in this war, and who knows what's going to happen in the next weeks ahead. Not expecting that, but rather China's, turn into short-term solutions for the current crisis.
Okay. Joseph, Iranian state TV called the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, Janbaz of Ramadan, a term reserved for wounded war veterans. He hasn't spoken or appeared on camera since his father was killed. Is Iran's leadership functional enough to negotiate an end to this war?
Yeah, that's a good point. He hasn't spoken, appeared on camera, or addressed the armed forces since his father was killed. There was a pretty bizarre display at a pro-government rally where they had a cardboard cutout of him. I also wonder if he's not injured, if he may be dead, and frankly, installing a dead successor would be pretty smart because you can't target a corpse. And given the Mosaic doctrine, they should be able to operate autonomously regardless. As to whether Iran can negotiate with an incapacitated supreme leader, technically they're not supposed to as per the constitution, but I think all the same, yes, likely through the IRGC. The US war aims, I think, are going to be first and foremost, complete capitulation on nuclear weapons, missile stockpiles, and support for proxies. That being said, I can't see a scenario where Washington puts boots on the ground, which I believe would most likely be required for complete regime change.
Okay. Timur, the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline has been about to happen for 30 years. Russia and Iran have always blocked it. Right now, one is bogged down in Ukraine and the other is at war with America. Is this finally the moment? And if so, who actually builds it and writes the check?
No, I don't think that it will lead to the bigger developments in the Trans-Caspian pipeline, because it was never the question of it was never the question of the resource shortages. It was purely geopolitical question that mainly Russia would not be happy to agree upon. That's why I do believe that Russia's structural position on that issue is still the same. Russia doesn't want to see it, and Russia wants to keep control over the energy flows inside, let's say, Eurasia. And keeping that in mind, and considering that with the bigger unpredictability on the market, Russia would want to have even more control over the situation and over the potential export and import flows. So I would say that now it's even less possible that something like this would be even realized in real life. But in addition to that, there is no real country that wants to invest into this pipeline. And this is actually the main problem for all of the potential pipelines and trade routes that we've been talking about that can connect Central Asia to so many other parts of the world. I mean, the north-south trade route from Russia through Central Asian countries to Iran has been in discussions for years, and it hasn't come to life. There have been a lot of talks about different logistical schemes and routes through the middle corridor, through the Caspian, through even with China, and most of them has just stayed on paper. The only exception here would be the railway from China to Uzbekistan through Kyrgyzstan, but it took those three countries around 25 years to agree finally on the final steps in how to transform that trade route from something on paper to real life. So I am very skeptical about big infrastructure projects in 2026. I do believe that it's not the time where any country is interested in investment into a very expensive, large-scale projects that connect different countries. It's not the time, and frankly speaking, I think it was the time of those projects has been 2000 and 2010s, and not so much anymore.
Timur, afterwards, how did the governments in Central Asia see these developments?
I do believe that the perfect scenario for Central Asian countries would be that there would be some sort of de-escalation happening there. Frankly speaking, what Central Asian countries would love to see is a magical scenario that is most likely unrealistic, but the one where Iran wouldn't have sanctions, the government would be accepted by all other parties of the world, and the war will end. This is a scenario that is not realistic at all, but this is the one scenario that would lead to success of Central Asian countries in this direction. But since this scenario is unrealistic, I think what Central Asian countries want to see is more predictability. So it means that ideally they would love to hear what's the plan of Washington and Israel in the current state of events. What is the objective of the current war, and when should Central Asian countries expect some sort of end of the current escalation, and what's the position of the newly or renewed political regime of Iran would be. So those are the questions that no one has answers to, and definitely Central Asian countries also do not. So the only way for them is to just adapt to the realities that will be brought to them by the event. So this is the only way Central Asian countries gonna behave in the nearest future on the war in Iran.
Joseph, the U.S. says it wants unconditional surrender. Iran's navy is destroyed, its leadership decapitated, but the IRGC is still fighting and controls half the economy. How real is regime change, and what would a post-war Iran, whether reformed or collapsed, mean for Central Asia?
So I don't think regime change is realistic without boots on the ground, which would be impossible for Israel given its size and political poison for a president who campaigned on ending forever wars. As you mentioned, the IRGC runs half of Iran's shadow economy, and more importantly, it holds a monopoly on organized violence. This is Khamenei's legacy. He made entrenching the IRGC as much as possible into the government and society one of his key objectives. The only opposition that is organized and could threaten the IRGC's dominance are some minority militias, specifically the Kurds and the Baluch. However, there are also issues with supporting these groups. I mean, first of all, the Baluch are very far away, so that isn't too realistic. And if you support the Kurds, it could cause pretty big issues with the ethnic Azerbaijanis inside of Iran, as well as Turkey, which would fear a resilient PKK. And it would have flashbacks to when the US partnered with the Kurds in Syria. So I don't think that's in the cards. And this was proven even more so after Netanyahu. He recently said, we are not trying to fragment Iranian society, which was a pretty big, it's a pretty big hint that no, this is not what we're doing. In the meantime, the US and Israel, however, have targeted the repression apparatus of the regime. So this means prisons, police headquarters, and the Basij. So they will try to give the Iranian people a chance to rise up. However, I don't think that's what they're counting on. In light of this, I believe that Washington is pursuing something more surgical. And that would be to peel off the top ideological layer and find an IRGC pragmatist who will cut a deal with Washington, somewhat like a Delcy Rodriguez type in Venezuela. As it comes to Central Asia, Iran's future is a big deal. The question, I would say, is what kind of Iran emerges from the dust. If the post-war Iran pivots towards pragmatism and economic integration and stability rather than ideological projects, then Iran could become the region's best friend. It would open up the southern corridor. It would help with the Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran railway, open up the Chabahar port, everything. That could all function at scale. Then Central Asia would also be able to get some sort of leverage against overdependence on either Moscow or Beijing. However, if Iran is to maintain its current ideology, which will continue to bring instability and problems, then that burgeoning southern gateway becomes closed. And I would say these countries, as long as Russia is bogged down in Ukraine, move closer and closer to China.
Okay. Iran has funded proxy networks in Azerbaijan, recruited operatives for attacks in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and threatened to turn the South Caucasus into a graveyard. Does a weakened Iran become less dangerous to Central Asia and the Caspian, or more due to the instability?
I think that when it comes to Central Asia, I don't know if there will be a big change. And the reason for that is Iran's support for terrorism in the region has been a lot more opportunistic than generative. What I mean by that is there have been occasional attacks that serve Iranian purposes in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, as you mentioned, and in Tajikistan as well, according to Tajik authorities. However, as far as I know, I don't believe they've been so successful in spreading their ideology in the region. Reason for that is the region is overwhelmingly Sunni. However, when it comes to Azerbaijan, it's quite a different scenario because Azerbaijan has more Shias than it does Sunnis. And so this is a place where the regime can have a lot more success in terms of funding extremism. In the case of Azerbaijan, I do believe that actually a stable Islamic republic would drive more instability and extremism.
Okay. Last question, it's for each of you. The U.S. has destroyed Iran's military and brokered the Armenian-Azerbaijan peace. China is pulling Central Asia closer. Turkey is positioning itself as an indispensable transit state. Russia is losing leverage. A year from now, does Central Asia look back at this as the crisis that broke old dependencies, or the moment new ones were formed? Timur, can I start with you?
You see, I think that you're right. Many things are changing inside Central Asia and outside, in connections with Central Asia's allies, and just the whole scene of international relations doesn't look as it used to. So this is the new reality where Central Asia finds itself. And particularly speaking, we see how Central Asia is preparing to this reality. We see that integration process, although this integration isn't called integration but called more cooperation, is on its way. We see much more cooperation among Central Asian states that we've never seen before. We see the end of conflicts that Central Asia inherited from the Soviet Union. And, it's not just a coincidence that it's all happening while Central Asia exists in this unpredictable world now. The region understands that, there is a need for bigger cooperation. There is a need to be stronger together. And this is the first reaction of the region to the events around Central Asia. And in addition to that, I think what sometimes seems like a chain of events that are logical doesn't necessarily mean that this is happening. For example, if we look at some of the facts of Russia's presence in Central Asia, although it might seem that the war in Ukraine has damaged Russia's ability to expand its power around the world, and especially in the post-Soviet space, although we see some of the facts that Russia is not so much welcomed, for example, in Central Asia, but there are still a lot of instruments that Russia can use to put pressure on Central Asian countries, and there are ways of how Central Asian leaderships are connected to Russia. So we shouldn't jump into conclusion that Russia is no longer in the picture. It's very much in this picture, and at the same time, same goes with all other parts of the world that now are present in Central Asia. Let's not oversimplify things and say that everything is different now. There are also very much heritage in presence of the past decades of Central Asia's modern history. So it's I would say it's a hybrid situation where, on the one hand, we have a lot of fundamental structures that exist in Central Asia consistently from the 90s, and some new tendencies that are changing the region or driving the region to a new future. And right now we're in the moment when those two kind of universes are colliding, and something will come out of it. But we're definitely not there yet. We're definitely not in the future.
Okay. Joseph, same question for you.
Sure. I think Timur made a great point. I don't think you can count Russia out at all. As he mentioned, it still has quite a bit of leverage in the region. And if the war in Ukraine was to end, then I do believe that Central Asia would become more of a priority. As it comes to other players, I mean, the war in Ukraine in general has really increased China's position in the region. I would expect that to continue. I think China is just in terms of this one region, China could benefit from what's going on in Iran. As to Turkey, I think that Turkey could, in theory, really benefit as well. Especially given first of all, the influence it has over a significant amount of Iran's population, the Azerbaijanis, but also without Iran as active in Central Asia. Not that it was so active before, but it does, in theory, open up more room for Turkey to maneuver. I think that this could be a turning point for the region if something new comes out of Iran. but I would not count on that possibility.
Okay, well, Timur, Joseph, thank you both. That's all for now from the Turan Research Center. For a full breakdown of Iran war's impact on the region, check the links in the description. Let me know in the comments, is this crisis Central Asia's moment of opportunity or the beginning of a new set of problems? Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.